So I'd like to get started on a daily series where I do technical analysis on Bitcoin and provide you my analysis and thoughts for the day, as well as my trading plan and the areas that I'm going to be looking to do business every day. And then the following day, we'll take a look back at the previous day, see what went right, what went wrong, what we can improve on, what we learned, etc., etc., and then continue with the analysis of the current day. But before we get started on that, I'm going to need to give you a rough idea of how I tend to mark up the charts, because if we just dive into my analysis, it might not make sense as to why I have some of the lines drawn on the chart that I do. So in this video, that's what I'm going to do. We're going to mark up this blank Bitcoin chart and give you an idea of how I would go about it when starting with a totally blank chart. So we have the daily chart of Bitcoin in front of you, and all I do is look for major swing points and major areas where the market has struggled to get through. So the first area that really pops out to me is we have this low here, we have this series of highs here, and we have this low here, all roughly in the same area. So what I'll do is just take the horizontal line and draw a line somewhere in the middle. But one question I'll get a lot here is, where exactly do you draw the line? Because you could pull it up to there into this group of lows. You could even bring it up even higher like that. But then you're missing all of these highs here. So you could pull the line all the way down to those highs. But then you're missing these lows. So there's a zone there where the line could be anywhere in that zone. And that's a critical thing to keep in mind. Despite the fact that I use discrete lines on the chart, I am always aware that support resistance is always a zone. Sometimes it's a wide zone, sometimes it's a very tight zone, but it's usually a zone of some form. But if I was to draw all of the zones on the chart would start to get much more cluttered very quickly. So I tend to just use lines. So where do I actually put the line? So what I tend to do is I have a few rules. So one, I kind of put it in the middle of the zone somewhere, roughly, doesn't have to be exactly the middle, but I'll always try and put it closer to the resistance if the area is below market, and I'll try to bias it towards support if we're above market. So that's quite hard to explain in words, so I've just got to do it on the chart. So here we have this zone that we've just explained. So I want to put it somewhere in the middle of the zone. But because this area is below the current price in the market, I'll try and bias where I put that line towards previous resistance. So in this case, this area here, that's previous support. So the market came down, found support, and moved up. But these highs here, the market came up, found resistance, and then moved back. So I'll try and bias this line towards that resistance rather than this support. So I'm going to have it somewhere in the middle, but then I'll just put it slightly down so it's biased towards that. So we can see we're still kind of in that zone, but we are closer to the previous resistance. So that's typically what I do. So now let's just speed through and put in the rest of the lines. So we have this zone here at the 7600, which if you saw my last video, you'll understand why that was a significant zone. And this also brings me to another point, which is we have very nice resistance in here, but then as the market came through, it kind of chopped. And in those cases, I want to be vigilant of that area. If we come into this area again and we chop through it again, I'm just going to say that area is invalid now. It's no longer a level. It used to be a very nice level over here, but it's chopped through it too much now and it's no longer a level. But in this case, I'm going to keep that as a level because we did find some support either side of this chop. And the chop, I explained in the previous video why we got that probe down and probe back up. So it's not something that I think invalidates the level. So I will keep it in for now, but if we do move into that area and chop around it, I'm going to remove it off the chart. So then continuing, I'll put in a level up here because we do have some nice resistance up here, bits of support over here. But again, we have an area where we could put the line. It's quite a big area. So in this case, what I would tend to do is put one right here and then put another one closer to the top of the zone. So then we cover all of these lows here and this high, and then we also catch this, but ultimately this is all one big zone, but I'll just mark it with 2 lines. And then from here, we don't really have to go too much, because I mean, we've got a line here up to 13,000 and a line all the way down here to 776. So we don't have to go too much further, because I tend not to want to clutter the chart too much. So we could go ahead and put a line here and a line up at the all-time high, etc. But I prefer to just keep the chart as clean as possible, wherever possible. So now we have the daily lines. So a point to mention here is I do have these in orange, and I've got the daily label on there. And if we double click to see the settings, I've got the visibility set to minutes, hours, days, but not weeks and months. So if we go back onto the weekly chart, all of those lines disappear. And the reason for that is that each time frame that I mark has a different color and a different visibility. So if I mark out the hourly chart, there's going to be a lot more lines in there than what are on the daily chart within a small space, because it's a smaller time frame, right? And I don't want to go onto the daily and then see all of those hourly lines, because it will just be way too cluttered. So I keep everything segregated. So here we've got the daily lines, and if we drop it down to the hourly, which is usually the next phase, I will mark out the hourly. We can still see those daily lines, but then we can come on and start marking out some hourly lines. So here we have a nice level here that I'll just plop a line on, and then I'll just go into the settings, and I have another template called hourly. And notice the visibility here is no longer set to days, it's just got hours and minutes, and I've actually dropped it down to 2 hours, so these lines won't even be visible on the 4 hourly chart. So now if we just take a look at that, we can hop up into the 4 hourly, and that zone is no longer there. And on the daily, it's also not there. So we can look at this daily chart and it's still relatively clean, and when we drop down to the hourly, then we start to see that line. Because that line is only significant to us on the hourly chart anyway, because this isn't significant resistance on the daily chart. So we'll just keep it on the hourly. And you'll notice here that this is resistance below market, and we haven't actually come back to test that as support. So that's definitely a level that I want to keep in the back of my mind. So then from here, we'll just continue to mark out some areas. Again, biasing towards this previous resistance instead of this support. Again, I'm doing this very roughly now because I've explained the methodology that I use, so I'm just going to kind of speed through. So now again, at this point, we have the support resistance lines drawn up to 2,400-ish on the hourly and down to 9,700-ish. And then there isn't really another hourly zone until way down here someplace. So I think at this point, again, just to keep the chart clean, this is a good place to be. So once I've got these on, I'll tend to go back to the daily and then look for any major trend lines that we have. So we'll just switch over to the trend line tool, and we'll draw a trend line from there all the way down through this high and through this high. And then we can see we're actually challenging that area right now. So now we have this trend line drawn on, we have some support resistance drawn on the daily, some support resistance drawn on the hourly. And then when I am trading very actively, I will drop down to the 5 minute and draw some key levels on the 5 minute. But I'm quite sparing with the levels that I draw on the 5 minute because it can get really cluttered. And not to mention, I only ever want to trade the best levels anyway, which will typically be the daily and the hourly levels. But sometimes there are really nice setups that form on the 5 minute, and I will take those, but just keep that in mind. I'm not going to draw on the 5 minute levels on this video, but it's just a thing to keep in mind. So at this point, we have a pretty decent map of the market for the key levels that we think Bitcoin might react to. And then what I'll usually do at this point is draw on some fibs from some key daily swing levels to see if any of the fib levels line up with the support and resistance that I've already drawn on here. So the first thing I want to try is to draw a swing from this all-time high down to the most recent low. And then see if there's any confluence. So we'll go from this swing all the way down to the bottom here. And what we can see is that the 50% fib for this whole downward move lines up almost perfectly with this support resistance level that we've drawn on. So what that tells us very quickly is that that's an area that we're going to want to keep an eye on. It may be an area that we find a lot of congestion. We may see a turnaround and a slight dip before that. Anything can happen there. We're not trying to predict exactly what will happen there. We're just keeping our eye on that level as it being a very key level for the market to get through. So I think at this point, I'm probably getting too deep into how I actually use this for analysis, and I'll save that for the future videos where I do the daily analysis. So I hope you roughly understand now how I draw on these support and resistance lines onto the chart. So I'm not expecting you to be 100% perfect at this right now. This is something that comes with practice over time, and hopefully through these daily videos that I do, you will gain a bit more exposure and practice to how I do it. But for now, I hope you have a rough idea and you understand roughly how I do it. But if you do have any questions, you can contact me on Twitter at @theproofofstake, or you can leave a comment on this video and I will get back to you. So until my next video, I will see you later.